Good morning. This is my lecture number 4 on human mind and consciousness and related social works. And the epigraph for this lecture are the words credited to Sir Francis Bacon, ipsa scientia potestas est, which in English can be interpreted as knowledge itself is power. Well, we'll be talking about power. And we'll start with reviewing the concepts I introduced in the previous lectures. So the consciousness works. Well, being an animal, Homo sapiens has senses, emotions, values, and these are the things that help every animal survive. And this is what they call the first signal system. Well, it is the first because in the end of 19th century, Ivan Pavlov introduced the idea of the second signal system, which is speech-based. So all the consciousness, reasoning, and all that stuff is based on a slightly different physiological base, and it works differently. So senses, what are the senses? Vision, tactile, balances, hearing. So some people name up to 20 various senses. Emotions, such as joy, sadness, excitement, curiosity, love, surprise, and like we can name a lot of them, maybe like tens up to 100. And the values, which is the smallest category, and the values such as modality, attitudes, ethics, for example, good, bad, neutral, comfortable, threatening, must, taboo, so probably not more than 20. And as the next stage in animal development, animals acquired speech, and that changed a lot. So basically, the animal as a scientific object, after it has acquired speech, turned into a different kind of object. Why? So we started with kind of dead matter, and classical science deals with that. So all classical science, mechanics, optics, is based on dealing with dead matter. Then life comes to life, and we're talking about a live matter. And it is arranged differently. So that is like not concerned with anything. So it doesn't change, it stays like that forever until the circumstances change. Alive is presented in separate organisms that live or exist in cycles from appearance to disappearance, from life to death. And at the same time, one type of organism cannot sustain itself. It needs a bunch of other forms of life to maintain its existence. And every individual organism is mortal, while the life in general, as a category, as a kind of matter, reproduces itself again and again, and that way it is immortal. Now, so we have this only one type of matter, dead. With alive, we have both dead and alive kind of matter, well, within organisms. So we still distinguish, so dead, alive, with appearance of speech. So two types of matter here. One type, two types, and with appearance of speech there is more. So that's why speech appearance is so important. It has to be distinguished as a separate, unique phenomenon that affects a lot of other aspects of existence. Well, talking about two signal systems, once the animal acquired speech, this new feature has influenced the physiologically based senses, emotions, and values in a very big way, so that human senses, emotions, and values are based on the same physiological basis, but they're different in many, many ways from what the animal senses were. So once we start understanding them, we start talking to them, we can distinguish more emotions than like an animal probably can. We can acquire different words for values, attitudes, and that's why we increase their number, we increase their variety and all that kind of stuff. So speech affects the senses, and well, now we can be talking of psychiatry as the art of word told to a person, and that word changes our physiological being. So that's psychiatry, how it works. Through the second signal system, we address our body and can cure a lot of our bodily sicknesses. So we've been talking about these two signal systems. One more difference. Senses as part of the first signal system, they are inherited, they are genetically inherited. So when a human individual is born, it can sense, it has emotions, it has values, but it does not acquire speech until the human gets into the social environment. So this second signal system is not inherited genetically. It's a potential, but as Mowgli examples demonstrate, no child left with the animals without any human interactions until 5 or 7 years old can be socialized, and these people die early. So that way, they say that the social component in human rides its animal base. So once it emerges, the social part overrides a lot of first signal system basis, a lot of physiology. Well, still we have to research to understand better how it works, but in general we can say that. Now, another idea that we had, as part of the second system, we acquire the monitor or the screen of consciousness. So how we understand we are conscious? We bring to our attention, to our focus, when we are awake, some facts, so then we can speak, we can address and understand, reason, and act as humans. And that is done through the screen of consciousness, the monitor of consciousness. And I like this analogy, that screen of consciousness is like a flashlight. So there is a huge ocean of senses, emotion, values, words, parts of the speech systems within the ocean of our consciousness, but only parts of this ocean can be seen at the same time. So we cannot be aware of everything simultaneously. We are able only to point our flash of light somewhere. So that's screen of consciousness. And see whatever is there. So then we can go somewhere else, But all these senses, emotions, words, and speech capabilities are hidden to us. So we can see only a small spot of it when we are awake. And this analogy also shows that while we are not aware of something, this ocean is alive. So the senses, emotions, words, and word constructions interact, they do something, and once in a while something pops up and gets into our attention, and it's like a two-way direction. So there is that something pops up from that ocean and attracts the attention of a flashlight, or we can intentionally focus ourselves on something. A good question is how we do this. And in my view, the big help in that is the categories and notions. So such a thing as categories and notions within our screen of consciousness help us find what we are looking for better in order to speak, to analyze, to reason. Well, having said that, so we have two systems, but these two systems are part of an organism. They are part of another big system. So living organism is a system. So we've been talking about Bertalanffy and his theory of systems. And in that way we can see, well, according to Bertalanffy, anything can be presented as a system. So if we present a living organism as a system, it's different from a system presented in this classical scientific approach of classical mechanics. And I've been saying that within every set of approaches, so we have ontological level, we have laws, we have thinking patterns, reasoning patterns. So, when we are thinking in the terms of classical mechanics, all these three layers of approach differ from the same ontic laws and patterns of when we're thinking or presenting an alive object, and so much more with the social object. Now, the question was, well, okay, ontologically, yes, so this is that nothing matters. Here, we need a bunch of organisms to keep everything alive, to keep everything going. So that's why the laws differ. But how about the thinking patterns? And this is what I wanted to talk about right now. So would be a good example of a system within classical approach, like say in mathematics. So we can say IA plus B plus C is D, or 2A plus 7B plus 3C is something E. And this is we can present this as a mathematical system. So there should be one set of solutions that satisfy both of these equations. So this is an example of a system in mathematics. Now, in terms of our tools, how we reason that. So these are the components, well, two big components, and these big components have their own parts. And in terms of solving them, we can say, okay, guys, let us modify one of the components. Everybody agrees? Nobody is against that? Okay, so let's pretend that D is more than 0. So we can modify this component and then solve the problem. Well, by doing this, we change one component and then solve the problem. And okay, while solving the problem, we'll find out that with this circumstance, the answer might be different, might be not, I don't know. But so we change it and start research and start counting. Now, if we take an animal and change a component in this animal, it will affect the whole system right away. And we have to keep that in mind. So before we start researching, so we cup the ears for a dog or end of the tail for some dogs. How does that affect the whole organism? Or we radiate the animal with something, with radio waves. Well, in order to see how it affects, but it affects other parts of the body. In other words, this system has a life of its own if one component is consciously modified that affects everyone. And that's another law that does not apply to this kind of system. While traditionally we are accustomed to this kind of thinking. Okay, let's change that and think what will happen. In dealing with a live organism, it doesn't work. Let's change that and stop. That will affect other parts of this organism. So that is an example of how one of the thinking patterns we use in classical science does not apply if we deal with a live organism. The same with social systems. The classical example of changing social system is a change of socialism to capitalism, or vice versa. So capitalism to socialism. And they say that the major thing that we change is we get rid of exploitation. But we do that with the society. And if we change one big feature of it, that inevitably has to affect, has to change, has to modify a lot of other things. So, well, Marx talks about that, but it has to be accepted at the level of our basic reasoning about dealing with these kinds of objects. So that's important, just wanted to mention that. Anyway, we studied the classical science with dead matter as an example, as to find out what are the general thinking patterns that brought up this current technological breakthrough that we're experiencing. And it's all based on this kind of thinking, on positivism. So we acquired some basic understanding. So we acquired that division into ontic, natural laws, thinking patterns. Now we see that they behave differently when applied to different three major types of object. And this is how we try to scientifically approach our goal, the social mechanisms. So I just talked about the difference in some thinking patterns. Well, and why that happens. All the components of an alive organism, they are aware of each other's existence and they supplement each other. They duplicate each other functionally to increase the endurance of the whole system, the organism and the whole system. And in that way, we cannot say that we think only with our brain or the nervous system. In that way, the way all parts of our body duplicate the functions of other organs, we can say that we think with our whole organism. I would say even more that thinking goes beyond that, because in this type of object where we are as thinking objects, thinking phenomena, it requires more than one person to reason. But anyway, so we looked at that in order to state that we can approach scientifically to our social being. Now, the question is how to approach reasoning scientifically. Well, first of all, we acquire most of the patterns. Then, according to these patterns, we can see that we have different types of objects. So they differ on at least 3 different levels of applying those patterns. When we came up closely to that, so I introduced the difference between the semantic triangle by Ogden and the semantic square by the methodological Moscow circle. And they view reasoning as outside of the human body. So if we go inside the human body, so we research personal psyche. So this is one kind of approach, this is one kind of object, and this is another discipline. Now, to view reasoning, in order to actually present it, we have to view it outside of human body, not to dissect anybody's skull, not to go inside the brains. So this is one thing. Another thing, we use mathematics. Now, so I mentioned that semantic triangle of organs. So there is an object, there is a brain. And the brain senses the object and presents it into some kind of symbol. So when brain perceives signal, it relates it to the object, and this is how this interrelation works. So and we know that object is this symbol. And this kind of understanding takes us to inside the brain when we think of thinking. Another approach and that takes our reasoning out of brain is, so we have objectified content. So we don't deal with live objects. We bring something on the board, we call it objectified content, and relate it to a symbol. And this relation is where all the reasoning happens. Yes, all these symbols are being sensed with our first signal system, and objectified content is being sensed too. So this is where the individual reasoning happening inside one's brain. And this is, okay, I will stop for a second. When we talk about objectified content, it is something very average, very statistical. So it's not that what I understand as a cat. It's not what you or Peter understand as a cat. It's a general notion of the cat that we refer to this word. So we jumped out of one's individual. But talking of objectified content, now we are more close to classical science. In which way? Objectified content is kind of a statistical average of understanding of that content. And classical science deals exactly with that. It deals with average statistical data. So, example is temperature. So what is a temperature? So if we go with that ontological view as everything is made of atoms, and these atoms move and hit each other. And depending on temperature, they move faster or slower. If I say that's like 14 degrees on the surface of the board, it means that statistically, all the movement of the atoms of this board come to a average degree of 14. So if we go very deep into the micro level, we probably can find a couple crazy atoms that move like with much more energy. We can also find some atoms that are much more stable and don't move that so well. But the average is this. And we take it as the concrete single temperature for this object. Deep in essence, it's the average, statistical average. The same here. So if we deal with objectified content, so we get into a similar pattern as we get with classical science with temperature. So that allows me to say that this scientific approach helps us to justify what we are talking about as being scientific. That's a very good point, which I like. So we take our thinking outside onto the board. We use mathematics, like statistically approach that, and we use terminology. So when we're talking philosophy, we're dealing with categories and notions, and we jump from one to another, and are very loose in our, well, what is it called? How we define things, and we can define it many ways. When it comes to science, we need to have stable terms that signify only this and have no defiances. All right, one more notion. When we talked about physics, we talked about classical physics, and I underline that because basically physics can be divided into three major levels. By the way, page 1, the table. Please have a look at page 1, the table, and the levels of human perception. It's micro level, macro, and mega. So micro, its division is according to levels of human perception. So what we see is macro level. If you go deeper inside the atoms and see electron, boson, gamma, whatever, it's a micro, and galaxies and that astronomy is mega. All these our classical science is about micro level. If we go into quantum physics, ontology changes a lot. There is a speed of light, there is speed of gravity, and the laws of Newton do not work. So when two objects hit, they behave differently, not the same way as we hit the board with something else. And thinking patterns, for example, the principle of Heisenberg, so that when they observe the particle, it behaves differently from when they don't observe it. In classical physics, we don't care do we observe it or not. The observer doesn't matter. In quantum physics, the observer matters. With a live object or social, the observer matters. So that's why it changes some of the thinking patterns. If we're talking about the one separate human, we are kind of atoms for the whole system, but we'll talk about that later. Again, one of the tools that was invented with formal logic, and that is classical science, and that Bertalanffy system concept. About terms probably. First about the terms, yes. Now we are talking about the terms. It's page number 2. So what terms are important, and I did not introduce them yet. Activity, it's autopoetical. Autopoesy is the term introduced by Maturana. He is the father of constructivism. It's a big approach. Maturana is a biologist. He's still alive, born in Chile. He still lives there. In 1960s, he introduced the concept of constructivism. And he introduced the concept of autopoesy. So what he says, a live organism reproduce themselves. And this reproductivity is installed in them, and this is their basic feature. So activity in the human society is a self-reproducing pattern of human group actions. So if you're talking about education, there is a certain pattern within Canada how education works. So there is primary level, secondary, higher education, post-secondary, and types of post-secondary, and it's set up differently. Well, people work on that. But if, let's say, we take the teaching staff out of this collegiate Grand River and place them in a different village and say, let's start a new college. The major patterns that they will use to set up that college will be the stuff that they have acquired earlier. Whatever is there already in their brains, they will reproduce that. Even if they will consciously try not to do it. Most of the patterns they behave will reproduce the pattern that they have been born in. It's not good or bad, it's just a fact. And that is autopoetical self-reproduction patterns. Now, we are talking about a separate human. Within social sphere, when we are talking of human, we are not talking about anatomical body. It's not important. What is important is a set of connections and other stuff. To better illustrate that, I have to reproduce the pattern or the diagram we had on the previous lecture. So we are talking about how grammar exists. So we have a human, and that human interacts with other humans. They talk, they use speech. And these people also talk back, and there is interaction among them. So within this interaction, they're speaking, they acquire some rules of applying that language. On top of that, they come across a grammar book that has written rules for that. And they try to read it, relate what they're talking about, how they use the language with the grammar book, and see, again, discuss that. So there is other kind of storages when there are not grammar books but just regular texts that are not grammar but about history when we read them. Anyway, all these flows of information and relations among people all together is the pattern that shows how grammar emerges. What I want to say is that that way, it doesn't matter how specifically this body looks. It can be a machine, it can be an alive person, whatever, but as soon as it performs some communication, it's good enough. 5 or 25 or 75 years old doesn't matter. Male or female or something in between doesn't matter. What matters is this information flow, and that's why, well, Marx did that. He defined a human as a node of group relations with regards to major social activities such as education or learning, manufacturing, and leisure. So these are the major areas of social activities. Now, reasoning activity. So this term number 3. It's a human activity to solve fresh problems. Here I underline the word fresh because if I want to solve this mathematical problem, it's something that somebody has already done before. If I want to talk about the Pythagore, like his rule for this is the square right here. So if we have a diameter and these points, so this is always a square angle, 90 degrees. If we try to prove this theorem, we repeat that has been already done before many, many times. So in that way, it's not reasoning. It's repeating something else, it's kind of remembering and understanding. In that way, the major intellectual activity, well, Plato said that, is remembering, and I would add understanding. So most of the time we try to understand what is going on, what he said, why he said, or she said, or anybody else, and this is what we're busy with. That's why reasoning as solving fresh problems happens very rarely. For example, one step forward in philosophy happens 1 time in 100 years approximately. So it was calculated that all the major breakthrough in philosophy happened approximately once per a century. So you can imagine that many people never really perform reasoning in their life. Well, again, we are talking of objectified content. That means this reasoning is spread among people, and it is spread in time as well. So, a sample of philosophy, right? The next advance will be the next century. But to do that, we need to read the books that were so written ago to make sure we do something new and not repeat what other people have done before. Well, and again, we can trace, now we know that we can trace our thinking on paper, on board, on some visual diagrams. So I also mentioned here one more consequence from this scientific approach. If reasoning is solving fresh problems, then idle thinking is not reasoning. So we can engage in whatever plotting, thinking, understanding we want, but normally, scientifically, we cannot call it reasoning. If it helps your own esteem, go ahead, call it. But scientifically, so we find a problem, we solve it, oh my God, that happened again after 200 years without solving the problem, now it's solved. So next 100 years, nothing will happen again. There is one more schema. So with this Moscow methodological circle, so they introduced how they understand reasoning, so relating content to symbol, and they also introduced the major pattern of that reasoning. So there are 3 layers of it. So basically, physiologically thinking, intellectual activity within one individual goes in pulses. So we do this, we see the result, we react to that, and we do something else. But technically, it results in linear text that can be like 1,000 pages long. But physiologically, when this 1,000 pages was written, it was a jump and start, and going back and back to the same words many, many times by many people. It's a result of work of many people. So that way, we better talk of not just reasoning, but reasoning action. So that implies the idea of it's regularly self-reproducing and happening within a group of people. So it's reasoning action, reasoning activity, and a group of people is with them. And these people do interaction, and they are engaged in understanding and communicating. And once in a while, on top of that, we start performing on these symbols and just add one and one and see what happens. Well, that happens in a while, but again, this is part of the whole pattern. So reasoning per se. So these are the 3 aspects of reasoning as that circle sees that, and we can present any reasoning as a combination of this stuff. So in order to do something, to achieve a practical result, we have to talk to each other, to understand each other, then actually do some intellectual effort. Then a result is again understood and communicated, acted upon, tried, evaluated, and so that goes in circles, and these are 3 major stages. If we are talking of a separate human, again, a separate human viewed as like something general, not me or you or him, but as a scientific approach, we are not talking about individual atoms, we talk about average. So a human in average, for individual thinking, they need values, they need skills, they need some actions, they need tasks, they need objectives, they need knowledges, they need tools. Well, somebody else's help, then see what we want to change, do some effort, change it, and again assess the results and things like that. So reasoning, if taken scientifically, is broken down into a lot of other components, which is a big story, and we'll not be doing that today. Now, again, according to the scientific approach, if we are talking of scientific approach and we need to talk about social something, we use that concept of the systems introduced by Bertalanffy. And according to this concept, what I'm saying, I'm promoting this concept as a reasoning tool. So it says that we can present anything as a system. And any system can be presented as a substrate. So we can view this system like what substrate it is based on. The next is the structure. Well, we need to see the components and how they are hierarchized, prioritized, and things like that. We can see how it's the morphology. I don't like PH. And we want to see the processes involved into that. So it's the, for me it's page number 2, but for you probably 2. Yes. It's number 5 point, minimal cell of reasoning. So the minimum cell is the idea of Hegel. So he says that when we see some object, we want to reduce it to the minimal working cell. And Bertalanffy suggests how we can break down that system. So we see that minimal cell is a system, and we break it down in substrate, structure, and everything else. And now, if we look at our reasoning as a system, we can see that its substrate is consists of several types of matter. There is dead matter present here. There is alive matter present here. There is flow of information present here. And there are different types of storage for that information. So I would say up to 4 different types of matter. And that's very complex stuff. Its structure. If we are talking about reasoning, there is one structure inside of another structure. For example, the first signal system is embraced by the second signal system. Now, this is one separate human, but our reasoning includes several people. So that system, as one single human, is embraced by a group of people who are engaged in that, and they differ in their function and their roles within this group. They also are part of a bigger system that creates these grammar rules and texts. More on this. All these happening of reasoning doesn't happen here and now. It's broken up in some time periods and sometimes can be spread up to hundreds of years. Recently, they have proven a theorem by a guy who died a couple hundred years ago, and only now they were able to prove his theorem. I mentioned with philosophy that as well. Functionally, so people within one interaction are diverse functionally. So one guy can act as an expert, another as a critic, the other as a thinker, the third one as a service person. Technically, one person can act separately on different functions. Like, okay, I am a father, I am a son, and I am a, yes.
So like I could be an expert, but also be a service person. But here you're talking about like they specialize, and in their specialization, you get some cohesive, unified system of thinking. So they think collectively.
Well, now we're talking about several systems that embrace each other. So one system is the functions of that has to be performed when we do reasoning. And the different functions, the presenter, the thinker, the expert, the critic. And another system is separate humans' bodies that perform these functions. Now, how do these two systems relate? It can be 7 different bodies, or it can be one separate body. So one person can pretend, okay, what do they say there? And then I start understanding what I have said. So I perform one function. Now I don't like what I said. I start critiquing that. That's a different function. But it's embodied into me only.
Right.
Okay, we can say, please. So you'll be the critic, you'll be the thinker. I am the service person, I will write down what you say. And you start one critiquing, one, so these are 3 functions performed by 3 different people.
Right. One person could technically do all of it, but it's more efficient if you have the specialization.
Absolutely.
I see, cool.
That's right. So the processes are very diverse here. So if we take our reasoning, our human, as a specific object, it's a very super complex system. It's complex in terms of substrate, it's complex in terms of structure, it is very complex in terms of morphology, processes, links among them. Just wanted to make sure, so that agrees with us. So again, one of the conclusions I come to is that our human as a social system is a very complex system. Now, as one more step, we have to make sure this is the minimal cell of this reasoning. Can reasoning happen if we are denied access to the internet and we cannot go to the wiki and see any sources or any information? It will be very difficult. If we are denied access to the textbooks, the same. If we cross out one of the functions, it doesn't work. So by cutting out parts of this system, we can see that the minimal cell of reasoning requires this whole bunch of functions, processes, people, actions, relations, and all that kind of stuff. What I'm saying, our minimal cell of reasoning employs more than one person, their relations, their active life, and so on and so on. So that means it's a super complex system. One digression though. So when we've been talking about ethics as part of our value system, sometimes there is a question. So is there an absolute ethics, some absolute laws of thinking or morality that are above all the humans? Some people say yes, some people say no. In terms of that, if we are talking about life. Life can exist only when we have an organism. There is no, this is life and this is an organism. It can only exist when there is an organism. If we start reasoning and we draw the board of consciousness and say, okay, this is what this guy is thinking, so he can think about life separately from an organism. So it can happen on our board of consciousness. So when we analyze stuff, I write it differently. So life and organism, these are two different words. They occupy different spot on my board. And I can analyze differently this and differently that. But life, in real life, does not exist when separately. So they come together only. Information. So we're talking about that information among people. It can exist only when there is a device to process that. So that means that now we might be receiving information that we are not able to process. It doesn't exist to us. Well, some people start hearing voices in their head, maybe, I don't know. They start processing something. But, so the idea is this. In order to this information to exist, these guys are able to process that, and they have all these whole systems of processing that information. Now, if there is some absolute knowledge or ethics that is above us, that means there is another type of organization that we do not know about. And what they radiate can be understood as something above our understanding and knowledge. So this is my understanding why sometimes people think of existence of some absolute knowledge or ethics. So that means that something can be there that we are not able to see. So the same as this table doesn't see us. And we might not be able to see something more complicated than our system. But, again, scientifically saying, that may be, maybe not, we don't know, and we, at this point, are not able to say. But again, this is a concept that kind of explains if there is some absolute knowledge, absolute truth or ethics. Again, it's Hegel's idea. So, all these 3.5 lectures were to say that we can approach our reasoning scientifically, and we can stand on our own feet and say to anyone, I am approaching social problems scientifically because on these grounds. And the social system we are talking about is such a complicated, complex system that doesn't have any analogies. So this is the most complex system there is in our understanding. Well, there is the next step. Any system, any process can be directed, governed, controlled, managed, operated, driven, ruled, steered, or done, affected in many other ways. So if there is a process, there is a way to steer that. If there is a system, there is a way to steer that. Now, 1991, a group of guys from the Soviet Union have introduced the most general theory of governing anything. It is page number 2, point number 6. The most generalized theory of governing for any size of a team. So before we start discussing, and that's basically why I started the whole series of lectures, to come to this, but in order to come, and to make sure we approach that scientifically and when we can critique it, we need some grounds. So these grounds are built to some extent. So we can start discussing how we can steer and rule this super complex system. And before we start that, several questions. Please raise your hands who have ever managed a team of 3 people, a team of 15 people, a team of 200 people. How about 2,000 people? Okay, 45 million people. Like Canada is 45 million now?
Oh my.
All right. Or 40. Anyway, it's growing. 1 million or 2 million every year. So my biggest achievement is being the chair of an organization similar to Canadian Boy Scouts. So it was called Young Communist League, and at the age of 16 and 17 I was named the chair of the district organization. So and roughly saying about 2,000 boys and girls there. And I want to share some experience. So they say, okay, Mike, now you there. Okay. So there was no elections, so I just come across, and a guy from another organization, the adult organization of Komsomol, said, okay, can you be that? Sure, why not? And with everything I performed as the chair of that organization, I was always asking, okay, what do I do next? Okay, stand here. All right, say this. Okay, come here this time. All right. So I did not know what to do completely, absolutely. And whatever I did I was being directed by my mentor. And it never happened to my mind to do something opposite or strange or do right. So like I even was not able to kind of say assess if I'm doing the things right. I always asked, is it okay? All right. So I was a complete puppet and doing whatever I did. And then, so when I finished school, somebody else came to that position, and my activity as the chair stopped. That means that, like technically, I was supposed to rule that, but in real life terms, I did not do anything without an advice or a direct command from the outside. And that, by the way, helps to like understand what prime ministers do or ministers of a government. Are there any courses to learn what a minister of the Canadian government should do? Yes, do you know?
What they should do, or like how they do it?
How, yes.
How they do it, yes, there are courses.
There are? So they go through a school?
Well, normally they go to university for like political science, and political science is supposed to teach them.
You mean all the members of Canadian cabinet have a degree in political science?
Ideally, no?
I would say, like, keep it close, no.
No? Well, never mind.
Well, yeah. Well, so they teach people to become the head of any organization, like to become the manager of a factory. Like you need a business degree or some experience, or like to say it.
I guess not that they need it, but the classes are there, if that makes sense.
So that means that when you become a big actor in a government or something, there are people who will tell you what to do.
Yeah.
There is a big staff of people who write speeches for the US president, for the Canadian Prime Minister, for any other Prime Minister. And if they occasionally have a slip of their tongue, as Mr. Bush did, there is a mass media who will explain that, oh, sorry, he didn't mean that. He just slipped of the tongue, okay. The guy was not awake quite, forgive him. Or when you see the written text of their speech, it's different if you compare that to a recorded video of that speech. Did you notice that? So when these guys start reading their speeches, they digress, and sometimes a lot. So they add a sentence, two or three, or paragraph, but the written speech is what is approved, and it appears in mass media as the source of information. Anyway, now, in order to analyze what we are talking in terms of how to direct, to steer, to rule society, we need to look at it, to analyze that according to the general system theory. So we need to see what is the substrate, what is the structure, what is the morphology, what are the processes, and what we can find out. It is end of my page number 2. So material, people, relations, so relations among people, and it is can be seen on this pattern on the board. Information flows, some social patterns, and egregors. So a new thing is egregor. Aggregate, it's kind of bring together, right? So one of the kind of phenomenon in our social life is that we create a objectified understanding of what democracy is, of what governance is. So if like save God, so I am taken and replace one minister of Canadian government, I have some ideation, some understanding of what it is like. So okay, I will know, I will need an office, I will have an assistant, I will have a phone number, I will have email, I will have a computer full of files that I can use only for work, not use it to email anything to my wife. So this is some kind of aggregated understanding of what is going on. So, and these egregors are the most spread notions, common sense understanding of our life. So it's one part of the material there is. The function of society is to sustain society self-reproduction. And it is written on the next page, just above this. And that is basically what we are here for. Individuals are mortal. Our society in general wants to sustain itself, to make sure it survives. A lot of various processes there and structure. And as according to the structure, as I said before, there is one structure inserted into another structure. You have heard of matryoshka?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the whole idea. Have you heard of maha? No. It's a doll when there is and one you put another. The secret is that the smallest doll does not see what is outside. So as I talked about absolute truth or absolute morality, we do not see where it comes from, but we see it happens, and it's a miracle to us because we cannot understand see how it functions. So again, first signal system embraced by the second, embraced by the group system, embraced by a bigger system, and most of the time the people from the smaller system do not realize they are part of another system. A very big example of this demonstration is, for example, so we live in our Canadian society, and this is one system that we know, and it is infiltrated by spies and other secret systems, by Al-Qaeda, don't mention KGB, and anything else. The guys who rule them, they know both our system and their system. And if they give a command, okay, pull up the code, burn this, kill that, something happens to us, we do not have understanding why it happens, because we are not aware of the works of the bigger system. Now, so this is one idea. So the social superstructure is very complex. It is interlaced, and now the next component we need, the subject. So activity is performed by some people. So the subject can be individuals and group. And these individuals or groups exercise willpower. Well, it's quite understandable, but I always say that we need to formulate, to pronounce all the naive and banal thoughts that there may be. You know what I mean. No, you don't. I have to say what I mean in order for you to know that. I have to draw that, to come back several times, and then you start understanding. Then if you bring back what you understand, I process that, bring back to you, and we do it several times, we can come to a more or less objectified meaning of what we are talking about. So that's why I pronounce a lot of things that seem to be obvious, but I have to say this is what I mean. Now, another idea that helps us approach that generalized theory of ruling anything. It's on page 3, this table. So we've been talking that the ocean of our consciousness has a lot of things in that, but we can process only what is already there. And we need some methodological worldviews or concepts of governance, whatever, loaded into our consciousness in order to speak about that. So I brought up oranges and chocolate. If you don't know what it is, how to, we can talk about taste, because it's not comparable. Pineapple is one taste, oranges is another one, chocolate is a third one. If people never experience that, we cannot discuss it. If you don't have an idea of governance at all, like what we have been talking about, we first need to bring that into one's consciousness. And that is the highest level of the idea. So basically, categories and notions help us find the ways into the ocean of our consciousness. The next level is chronological. So it talks about history, concept for historical trends. Okay, the society develops, or maybe it's not. It goes in circles, or it goes into, what is it called, a spiral. It's two different concepts, right? Either we come back to where we have been, or we come back to a similar level, a similar state, but on a bigger level. There is also, for example, a concept that well, within this society, we can find examples of all kinds of manufacturing systems that have ever been invented by humanity. So we can find slavery here in Canada, here and now. We can find feudalism, we can find wild capitalism, we can find imperialism, we can find socialist and communism relations within the same society at every given moment. But again, one of them gains the biggest niche, can be noticeable more, and statistically, again, talking about scientific approach, statistically we name this whole society as it belongs to this or that type of society. So this is understanding of history and concepts for historical trends. And also facts like science, technology, links them on various processes. So I talked to you about temperature, and you understand me, thanks God. So you've been taught at school, so you've got this idea of movement of atoms, and that's why we can discuss that. So this, at this level, also belief systems, faith, religion is, well, they say that science is another religion, so it's structured the same way as any religious belief. The next level is economical, money flows, industry, production. So the way we produce stuff affects our thinking. Guys, I would just want to bring a good news that the robot rebellion cannot happen within the next 20 years. Because more than 50% of all the goods manufactured on this planet are manufactured manually. So robots industry and mechanization is so far lag behind that robot rebellion cannot happen within the next 20 years. There's too much part of our life on this planet is still done manually as hundreds of years ago. I'm talking about 50% of the great industrial output of China and India. They are more than 50% manual. Well, there are two factories in the world that produce all the gadgets in the world, like Nokia, BlackBerry, Galaxy, or Samsung, whatever. Only two factories. There is one or two factories enough to produce all the T-shirts for all the population of the world. There is enough food already produced to make sure nobody is hungry. Like more than 50% of North Americans are obese. Like I have about 20 extra kilos on myself. But somewhere on the other part of the world, there are people who don't have enough to eat. But again, generally speaking, there is enough produce on this planet to feed everyone according to the scientific laws. Another part or level of power is genetical. So means that if somebody is drunk or under influence of some substances, it can be ruled and governed easier, pushed in the right direction. Ways of life and diet. So the way, like Coca-Cola is not I'm not a promoter of Coke. Too much sugar in that. And if I think now there was a rule that they don't sell those beverages in schools. Is there? There was discussion.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I know there've been health initiatives.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know if they've had to.
But anyway, if I were the Prime Minister of the Canada, one of the first decrees I would say, put at the entrance of each fast food restaurant, you enter this facility at your own risk. And just be aware of that. And the lowest level is military power. So when you take guns and say, do this or that. So that means now there are two arrows there. The speed, how fast are these levels of power? The slowest is number 1, the fastest is number 6. Introduction of worldviews is very difficult, it takes centuries. Like we are living under the influence of the Bible Project right now. It is at least 500 years old, and it has been like introduced for so many years. Now it's deep in our minds. But it works so well that it influences the way we make decisions. Our understanding of history also helps that. Like when we start thinking, okay, we want to change our society. What for? And we go historical and see, guys, okay, what are historical concepts, what are historical illustrations, examples of alternative ways of organizing life. If you don't like this, okay, what do? So we use history to find something and work on it. And that is faster than introducing the Bible. Economically, again, I said how we produce things affects our thinking as well. Make sure you're not influenced by any substances. And military power. Now, the capacity of influence of these power levels of power is in reverse. So the least powerful level of power is military or judicial. So if they accept a law, they introduce a law to the system, it works right away, effective today, but do people follow it? Oh, I didn't know about that law. What is that? Okay, I read it, now I have to understand that. So the way it works is much less powerful. And there are a lot of examples when people, even threatened by death, by being shot, they still do not agree to do stuff, right? Now, if we know history and we apply some historical examples, we can act on this or that way. And even if we are left without direct command what to do, we'll act based on the historical facts we have in our memory, on our patterns and understanding how all this life works, on our concepts. So that's what I said. If you take a bunch of teachers from the school and send them to a village, they will duplicate the system they're already aware of. So this is how worldviews work. And that way, the next step is this. Now all these first 5 levels of power are not structured. That means that there is the Bible in this library, there is something else, but nobody tells us, do exactly as it says. Okay, even they say it doesn't work, right? So it's not a direct command, it's a recommendation, it's a fact, it's a notion, it's a concept. Yes, there are institutions like churches, so many of them, different types of faith, religion, organized, non-organized. But again, it's just a flow of information out there, and it's not a direct command. It's not institutionally structured in a way that we have police, state, or schools or something like that. Once again, now looking at these 6 levels of power, there are 2 major types of it, structured and unstructured. And this concept answers another big question of conspiracy. So you probably heard of conspiracy, right? So, and when we discuss conspiracy, we say, oh, there is a conspiracy to make sure people use cars or go to fast food restaurant. Give me the facts. Can you prove it is conspiracy? If I step out, do I have to go to McDonald's? No, I don't. I'm a free guy, right? I can go, I cannot go. Like, where's conspiracy? Nobody pushes me. They say, no, you don't have to. Oh, and we have a very good healthy choice there. If you don't want Coke, okay, there is water. Come on. We're not killing you. Now, conspiracy is based on understanding that everything, all the power is performed only under direct command and the structured command. If we accept that power also works unstructured, that makes difference. And that way we can call conspiracy a naive and uneducated view on a sense something is going on, but I cannot understand why it happens. Why all the people all of a sudden accept that way of tolerance? Like, you don't have to. But there is a peer pressure, there are other things, there is understanding. You cannot perform properly your functions within society if you don't follow this or that rule of pattern. Oops. And I go to work to get money in more compliant than a slave 200 years ago. I have a mortgage. I hopefully will get rid of that today, so we're meeting with our bank staff to close our mortgage. But we've been waiting for that for more, about 15 years. My God. But when I close it, I still have an open line of credit. I have to pay it off, if not. So, and that is the unstructured way of making me behave the way I do. Again, it works very slowly, but it's more efficient, it's more powerful than a direct command, do this or do that. So, now we have a super complex system that can be directed. Now we have this is an object. Now we have subjects, people, individuals, or groups that can be. And now we have tools to perform this steering. And they are structured, some of them, and unstructured. They are much more powerful. And another point to introduce before I'm talking about this most generalized theory of directing anything is the concept of the full power function. Basically, it's the mechanism of unstructured power. So the subject that decides, has a willpower to do some changes to this object, first of all, has to determine the environment in totality of all its aspects. Okay, where am I? So this is the question. So I have to find out, where am I? In terms of walls, I understand that. This is a library, this is a collegiate institute, this is Canada, this is our planet. Now, socially, where am I? I didn't touch upon social divisions and phenomena at all. So that's a very big topic. But basically, we have to be very much aware informally, like to ourselves, to say what is going on, what is around us, what are the things that affect us. Now, once we have got the idea, we have to grasp that pattern, that how we understand what is going on, and to train the skill of determining our environment. So, okay, in order to get my slavery status, I need to understand what slavery is, voluntary and involuntary, how it works, and I have to be able to recognize this state in other people. Okay, why do I think I have to? So this the other people, the same. So what determines that? And that understanding, grasping the idea, helps to implement this understanding. Now, okay, I've got the idea where am I? My God, what I've got into. And now I have to formulate my objective. And this objective is understood as a vector. So I'm here, and I want to get there. So this is my vector, so this is my objective, and I have to come from this point to the next point. Well, now, in order this vector to be active, we need a concept of how it works. I want it to be democratic, I want to be free, voluntary, or humane, or not violating anybody else, or I don't care about other people and I do whatever I want to get there. Now, the next point, so once we defined our vector and what we need to do, now at this point we need to create structures to implement our goal. And this is why actually all institutions emerge, because somebody had an idea, a concept first. Okay, it's not here. A concept, or here in this table, a concept. And based on this concept, they started creating churches, prisons, state, police, educational institutions, and other stuff to implement their idea. Well, now after the structure is created, I have to monitor how it works. Guys, how are you doing there? Are you doing okay? So please report what is happening. So, or I do it myself, not believing what they say, but I have some objective data to monitor their actions and see, okay, are they going the right way? If not, I have to do a corrections to what they're doing, to correct. So there is a corrective vector, and there is a vector of mistake. So things can go somewhere different way, and there is a correction action. So it went astray, we have to correct it, to do something. And after we have arrived to our destination, we can demolish those structures, their institutions, or keep them going and help them performing their functions. So basically, in these powerful functionality, what is it called? The full power function. These 7 points describe this generalized theory in most general form, which doesn't make sense until we get to examples. So I mentioned there is non-structured governing, and now how does this actually work in real life? Let's go many years ago. I'm not sure how many, because there is a lot of argument. Some people say that ancient times and medieval times happened in the same period of time. There's a big, and now I'm waiting for a book that will come up this year. The guys will demonstrate with facts what is the real history. So I'm monitoring this guy, promised me to be, so I'm on the list of the people to receive the first versions, and we communicated in terms that he is going to get it translated, and I will help him edit the translation so we can publish it in English as well. But anyway, so there is a big question when that happened, but anyway, as a generalized idea, we know there was a guy named Aristotle, and he lived in the land of Egypt, and he was one of those people who've been discussing global concepts of existence. So he's famous as a great philosopher. And at one point, he decided to demonstrate how, again, his concepts will work. You know that Socrates once demonstrated how his philosophy helps to live. So everybody was saying, "You are so clever, or you're so smart. Why you're not rich?" He says, "I don't want to." Okay, then you're not smart. And he made a trick. In 1 year, he knew that, like, the olive crop varies. 1 year it's good, the next year it's low. So again, so these years vary, and he knew the succession of these years. So 1 year there was a very good crop of olives were very cheap. He bought a lot of olive oil. And so, okay, well, look at this guy, he's not smart, he's buying it so cheap, we don't need there's so many. Next year, there was no good crops, the olive prices went up, and he sold that olive oil for very big prices. He got enormous profit. But he did that just to point out the thing that this is how I can make money, but I don't want to. Anyway, Aristotle just wanted to demonstrate what education can do. And like before that, education was basically not open to everyone. It was only some close groups were able to get good education. Aristotle said everybody can get educated. So you can pay me, I will teach you anything. Well, maybe. So to demonstrate that he can do tremendous stuff with education, he went to Albania. It's in Europe. So do you remember geography? So Egypt is in Africa. So he crossed the Mediterranean Sea, went to the outskirts of Oikoumena. Oikoumena is the civilized land in Greek. So Albania or Macedonia was at the outskirts of the civilized world for Greeks. He went there. He went to a very small kingdom, which is now Albania, and he found the King Philip there. He said, okay, I can teach your son and a bunch of his friends. So they were poor, right? Even in terms of being royal, they were not very rich. And he took a group of teenagers, including the King Tsar, and he started teaching them. So he founded the first lyceum. As a result, the son of Philip, his name was Alexander, became Alexander the Great. After being, well, he didn't teach just only boy, a team of people, because it's very difficult to do stuff alone. And they created a big army that conquered all the front Asia, right? Like that. But Aristotle told Alexander, don't go to India. So Alexander conquered most of that land where, like now is Syria, Iran, Iraq, this area, and the next step to the east is India. So Aristotle said, don't go there, and Alexander did. So Aristotle sent him poison, and Alexander ended his life a young, well, about less than 40 years old, because a punishment from his teacher. But anyway, that he demonstrated what education, if you load enough information here in a systematic way into one's consciousness, it can work miracles. And that shows again the power of methodological and concept knowledge. But it worked rather slowly, like it took him several years to educate the guys. Another example. Okay. Well, at that time in Egypt, there were a number of highly educated priests that had all the power. And there were two parts of Egypt, and south and north. 11 high priests in one part, 11 high priests in another part. They would come together and discuss possible scenarios of how to change life. So one of the changes is example with Aristotle. So these guys introduced the Bible project. So all the Bible history started with Egypt. But these kind of conceptual discussing and making scenario type of ruling exists up to this time. And that's why if there is something important happening, you can see these numbers, the 11th of September, 22 victims on at 22 p.m. or something like that. So usually if something big happens, there are these kind of numbers associated with that event. That means that it was thought about and performed by the people who have that conceptual power, and so they monitor and they have the vector of achieving where. Now, who belong? Well, this body of governing our present world can be called the global predictor. And it's not necessarily the richest people. I'm sure there are some richest people among them, but there are also writers, philosophers, some thinkers that are part of that process. One of them was Herbert Wells, who wrote that the War of Worlds and the Time Machine. His first novel was The Time Machine, written in 1895, and there are two, he thought about a future existence of the world, and he was thinking of two types of people, Eloi and Morlocks, where Elois can only do labor work, and what they're told to, Morlocks make them do stuff. So one are the masters, the other are slaves, and they genetically are like that. They're so used to that, it reproduces so often that, so this is one of the scenarios our current predictors want to happen. So they want us to divide into castes. But again, what other pieces of information that help us understand what kind of plans our global predictor has? There is a link to the Denver murals. Oh, yes, so at page number 4 here, so it's Wikipedia Georgia Guidestones. Have you heard of them? No. So in the open field, there are 3 stones, like 10 feet high, and it's encrypted. We need only 500 million people, and this and this and that. So I don't remember the exact wording. You can find it in the link, but nobody knows who built that. Nobody knows who ordered that. But these concepts are the scenarios and the future that this global predictor currently is working on. And this is the way they unstructurally influence and give a signal to other people to what we are working on. Denver murals. There is Denver International Airport that has murals and some inscriptions. And again, there are a lot of rumors and conspiracy theory about that. Please read about them to the link. And there is a abstract from about that. So you can read that too. Conspiracies and controversy. Like the runways laid out in a shape similar to a swastika. And so there will be one world government. Anyway, I want to tell you just in terms very quickly what might be the general concept that this world predictor is striving for. So the world population has to decrease significantly, less than 1 billion people. And there will be almost no states, or the current states will lose their sovereignty, so their ability to do whatever they want. So the global net of power will dictate every state what everyone does. There will be states that will be do manufacturing like China does now, and they will suffer from environmental issues, while most of industry has been already removed from the US, you know that, and that's part of the global plan to just concentrate kind of good, nice people in one country and workers and slaves in another country. There is a plan of creating a man-built islands in the open ocean that will inhibit only people with high-tech gadgets that will be away from any manufacturing and other stuff. So they will do the high-tech stuff there. in a very clear, safe environment, while we still have a lot of manual labor, and it will exist for a very, very long time. Somebody has to do that, but so these guys want to separate this geographically, so to make sure, again, here we do not have the dirt that the manufacturers will get. So that's control of population, separation of clean and dirty population. Yes, and corporations are going to direct and steer our life most of the time. By the way, that freedom that internet and gadgets brought us, it also at the same time brings a lot of abilities to control us. So if you have a gadget, that means that your can be traced, your whereabouts can be traced at any moment, right? Just, oops, GPS signal, where is Mohammed, where is Peter? They cannot find me. I do not have smartphones. But I'm sure my car has some traces, probably the computer. But anyway, like, who cares? At the same time, the fact is that we can be traced and controlled in much more easier way than it was 50 years ago. Well, now, I've been talking about 1991. So the guys who actually has written about these unstructured ways of governing, they lived in Russia, and they formed their own group of predictors. So they call themselves the inner predictor of the Russian Federation. So this is a group of, they have written about 65 books now. And if you access these books, they are said, we do not claim any author rights on them. Anybody can publish them, sell them, whatever they do. Only remember that if you abuse this knowledge, there is that absolute mind that watches you, and they will punish you. So that's good enough for them. So I know several of them. They don't disclose the whole number of the group or their names, but at least 5 people actively lecture, have video blogs and things like that. They are different in there, but they work on the same book together. So the same, what they do, one of them starts a frame of the book, writes down the text, passes to another guy goes through, brings in all the corrections, the next guy comes back until everyone agrees on every word, and then they publish it. So 65 books like that. And right now, most of my knowledge about that comes with the guy who has a video blog here. So on the last page, you say inner predictor for RF, and there is a link on YouTube. So the guy speaks in Russian, but this link is to a video that has English subtitles. Yeah, they have made German and English. And these are like the previous year. The latest is December 2017. And he talks every week, once a week. So on Monday, on Tuesday it is published. He gives his outlook on what is going on and why it's happening. He explains things like that. So, as I said, that global predictor would love to get rid of all the states. So that's why global predictor was plotting, was conspiracy, had a concept of demolishing the USSR and they have achieved that. They have demolished socialism in the USSR as well. Now, there are two other very powerful countries, the US and China. So the next in their works is US. So they want to make sure US loses its power that it used to have. And in terms of who will be better for that, Trump or Mrs. Clinton, it doesn't really matter. They will work on that no matter who is at the head. The only thing is that with Trump, it will be less bloody than with Mrs. Clinton. So that's the only difference. But again, I am coming back and saying, why did I start this whole series of lectures? Why the hell I'm saying about that? I was born in the USSR, 1960. 1985, so started perestroika. And before that, I was talking to my friends, to everybody else, and they were sure nothing is going to happen. This society, this system is forever. It will never change. Whatever you do, whatever you say, forget it. Just go with the flow and it will happen. 1985. 1981, the USSR disappeared, 60 years after. Nobody was interested in what is going on, why it happened. Like, what can we do? Where should we go? What is changing? No ideas, anyone. Now, it is 2017, so 20 years, more than 20 years after, there was so analytical work done on it. What happened? Why it dissolved? Who worked on that? So they appeared that the most generalized theory of governing unstructurally. Now I came to Canada, and I feel again the same way as I felt in the Soviet Union. Guys, it will never going to happen. Don't talk about, changes, no. Yes, we have to go with the flow, but I personally have experienced a very quick change, and I found an explanation why it has happened, how it happened, what is the mechanics. So what I'm saying is that, guys, there is a scientific approach not to believe whatever officials are saying, to do research on ourselves, and to understand and find out for ourselves what is going on, how we can change that. The inner predictor of the USSR has stopped the further dissembling of the USSR. So in 1991, USSR broke down in 15 parts. And there was a plan of further breaking down Russia into smaller countries. The inner predictor stopped that process. How? Publishing a book, doing public lectures, talking on the internet. But that brought that awareness to the most population in the country. So the guy hits hundreds of, what is it when we watch it? Hundreds of views, 100,000 of views each of his video, like thousands of people interact, and other groups appear and appear of thinking of where we are going. So that changed, again, the process of further disarmament of Russia. That brought Putin to power, and that brought him about 80% of popular support from around the country, because they want to go that direction. Again, what I'm saying, guys, let us educate ourselves, let us learn more about it, let us think what we can do and how we can practically affect this thing that is happening to us. So that is just my message. If you're interested, please talk back and we can discuss that and find the ways. I wish we can find ways, and I hope we can, because we have enough tools to do that on our own. Thank you very much.